Welcome to this week's episode of the Jewish Diaspora Report. On this week's episode, I just can't take it anymore. Let's get started. I was in the middle of preparing my podcast for this week, and I actually ended up throwing it out because I just couldn't take it anymore. Please forgive the fact that this episode is going to be a little less formal and researched and a little bit more off the cuff and stream of consciousness. As I'm sure most of my listeners know and have been hearing all over the news is the increase in the attacks against Jewish people in Israel these days, along with the missions in the West Bank and in the Judea and Samaria areas against Palestinians. The increase in violence against all people, but especially innocent civilians who are riding in cars or going to the store. Honestly, I just really am struggling to think about topics to talk about other than the death and destruction. It's really stopped me from wanting to even do the podcast. Like, what am I even doing this for, considering the fact that people are dying on the streets and there's really nothing I can do about it? The daily notifications of teenagers or young adults being murdered by stabbing, shooting, or car rammings, it's just too overwhelming to even consider doing a podcast about some serious issue. The worst thing is that if you listen to my podcasts, you know that I had called this a number of weeks ago, as we saw the increased missions into Judea and Samaria or the West Bank by the IDF. I had suggested that the increase in terrorism was caused by a civil war within the Palestinian Authority. For more information on this, you can check out our previous podcast. We are seeing almost a competition between the various Palestinian leadership groups to try and one-up one another for the most destruction and devastation against the Jews. We have the new kid in town, the Lion's Den, that's finding its way in the West Bank area, pulling out car rammings and stabbings all over the West Bank against innocent civilians. We also see Fatah, or the Palestinian Authority, sanctioning or agreeing with the increase in Palestinian hate against Israelis and refusing to actually do their job and provide security for their own people and the Israelis in the area. If you look back, this wasn't an issue a number of years ago, mainly because the Palestinian Authority maintained security and control over their own region. They protected their own civilians from internal struggles with the terrorist organizations. And taking care of these organizations stopped the Israelis from having to come and do missions in the West Bank, which in turn, of course, limited the amount of people that may have been harmed by accident during an IDF mission in close quarters battle. We are also seeing an increase in rocket fire from Hamas in Gaza, who are firing rockets as some type of retribution against the Israelis trying to defend themselves against the random Palestinian terrorists who aim to harm civilians. As I've said in many podcasts before, it's such a ridiculous area to be in, where you have the Israelis trying to defend themselves from the constant attack or threat of attack by terrorist organizations. These organizations have little to no interest in actually making peace or even taking land. They simply want death and destruction. So Israel has the choice: do you send your soldiers in order to try and stop these terrorist attacks before they happen and risk the rocket fire from Hamas in retribution, or a random stabbing in the road because of the perceived injustice of killing a terrorist or wannabe terrorist? It has been years since we've seen this type of violence and hate taken out against civilians in the streets of Israel and the West Bank. Things are spiraling out of control, mainly because the Lion's Den, the newest kid on the block, wants to cause as much chaos and destruction as they possibly can to be the new leader among Palestinian terrorist groups. The unelected Palestinian Authority is losing control, and someone's going to have to fill that vacuum, and it seems like they want to be the one. And just like the Palestinian Liberation Organization in the past, they have to prove their worth to the world, that they are willing to destroy and harm human life in order to take control over the Palestinians. Let's not forget how Yasser Arafat, the head of the Palestinian Liberation Organization, eventually becoming the PA and the leader of the Palestinians, got his job by creating chaos, destruction, and death in his wake. Of course, I'm not letting Israel off completely from this situation. Israel is really put in a tough spot where they have to go into the towns and the refugee camps in order to try and stop terrorism from happening. On occasion, by accident, because of the close quarters fighting, someone who is innocent will get hurt, which is tragic and absolutely shouldn't happen. But this does not justify the terrorism that happens against Israeli citizens who are the targets. Violence is just breeding more violence. And as long as the Palestinian Authority, the people who are supposed to be taking control of this area, refuse to do anything against their own people, they get to have their cake and eat it too. They get to keep control and not harm their reputation among the terrorists in their area, who might come after them if they stand up against them. And they also get to blame Israel for all of the problems and sanction the attacks against Israeli people. I just honestly cannot imagine what it feels like to be Israelis. I know they're incredibly tough, and they get through all of these murders and deaths of their own people for seemingly no reason whatsoever. But I just can't sit here and watch as people are killed and families are in tears burying their loved ones. Innocent civilians on both sides should not be harmed. Soldiers on both sides should not be harmed. Terrorists, however, I have very little sympathy for. Unfortunately, this week we saw some people taking the retribution into their own hands. We saw Israeli settlers trying to get back at Arab villages in the West Bank as retaliation for the death of their sons and daughters. Obviously, and without question, I condemn these activities, and I'm absolutely hurt to see Jewish people and Israelis doing this to others. We are better than that. We are better than them. Do not let them lower us to that type of thing. The people who are responsible for this entirely are the people who are committing these acts, the heads of these groups, and most importantly, the Palestinian Authority, because they are refusing to actually deal with it. In the past, the Palestinian Authority has worked with Israel in order to take out terrorist threats. However, it is now official that the Palestinian Authority has said they will cut all ties with the Israelis when it comes to security concerns and trying to take care of terrorism within their own area. They will no longer support the end of terrorism against the Israeli state and protect their own people from these terrorist groups. They are essentially letting it all go wild, all to keep power for themselves, to make sure that they are not voted out or worse, killed and removed. Unfortunately, I understand the brainwashing and the problems that cause the Palestinians to do what they do. What I will never understand is how the world sits back and pretends that none of this is happening. Or worse, somehow blames the Israelis for all of this and excuses everything the Palestinians are doing or not doing to stop this. I really don't know how to end this podcast. I was hoping for some type of positive ending note on this, but really I'm just feeling so helpless that I don't know what to do. All my studies in history and understanding the conflict doesn't help me come up with some sort of crazy answer to this problem. I pray that we can turn down the violence and turn down the heat on this situation. The cycle is just getting too much, and too many people are being hurt. I go back to one of my favorite quotes by the late Golda Meir, the Prime Minister of Israel, and it helps me get through some of these challenges and be hopeful for the future. Peace will come when the Arabs will love their children more than they hate us. I pray for that day. I pray one day that they will actually look at us as friends and cousins rather than as someone that they want to murder. And maybe when they get a leadership who believes so strongly in the well-being and the safety for their own people, they will sit down at a table and come up with some peace that Israel and Israelis have been dying for generations. The Palestinian people deserve it, and so do the Israelis. We need to get rid of the terrorist organizations. We need to get rid of the Palestinian Authority, who thrives on this type of situation. We need to get rid of Iran-backed Hamas and Hezbollah, who have nothing more than rockets and death and destruction to offer. Hopefully next week we'll be back with a much more positive and happy situation. This has been another episode of the Jewish Diaspora Report. Don't forget to check us out on social media at jdr.podcast and check out some of our other episodes on your favorite podcast source. We'll see you next time.